everyone and welcome. I'm back this week making a miniature Book of Shadows that will sit on the table in my miniature Witch's Cottage lounge that I'm making for Halloween. So here we are in Canva. If you're not familiar with Canva, it's quite straightforward. You start from the home page and go up to the top right there, and you can choose what size document you want. I'm choosing A4 for this one, which is also, I think, US letter size. I'm not sure. In Australia, we call it A4. So here we are. If you have a look through, it can seem a bit overwhelming at first, but it's actually quite user-friendly and easy to use once you get used to it. So I'm just starting off by going to elements over there on the left and choosing a rectangle to put over here. And I've just made it in these colours so it stands out a little bit more. This might be confusing because at the end I will change it all back to white, but I just found it easier to picture how it will look in the end. To add text, you just go to over there on the left where it says text and add a text box. And I'm just moving it around to try and line it up to where it will go. So if you can imagine, the little rectangle I've made there is meant to be the two sides of the pages of the book, and it's not exactly how I'm going to print it, but it was just to give me the idea. Now I'm going in here to choose the font, and of course you can choose any font you like. I typed in vintage to see what options it gave me. You can also try medieval or calligraphy if you want that older style handwriting. So I'm now going in and changing some of the spacing. So just small changes like changing the space between the lines and the letters. I am definitely no expert in any of this, but I really like how it changes the way that the whole look turns out. So now I'm doing my first spell, which I'm calling New Day. So if you want to head to my blog, I explain a little bit more background of making this book. But just briefly, I decided to do 8 spells in the book, so 8 pages. In the end, I actually realised I could have done a lot more quite easily, but I wasn't quite sure how it would turn out. But anyway, we've got 8 spells, and I'm starting off with this one. I did make the spells up myself. However, you are welcome to use the ones that I've made. So now that I've got the spacing worked out, I did decide to change the font that I was using, and I ended up using the Brixton Sans Outline font. So you'll see now that I'm writing out the spells. Depending how you feel about this, you may want to make up your own spells depending on your own personal beliefs. I found this really, really fun and enjoyable, and really I just likened it to a real actual Book of Shadows. So I decided on 8 different spells overall. I went with one for the new day to do in the morning, a house blessing, meeting of hearts, fertility, strength, abundance, healing a broken heart, and being of service. So you'll see all of my spells later on, but you may very well like to make up your own. A lot of what I'm doing here is just kind of tweaking things, moving them around and changing the way that it looks on the page. So that's all, of course, just personal preference to see what you want. The next part, though, I decided to put a small image on each spell page. So I searched for images that, for me, kind of reflected what the spell was about. So for New Day, I'm searching for a sun. I sometimes have to try a few different ways of describing what I'm looking for before I kind of land on what I'm thinking about, but it was pretty easy actually with this project. So I just put the sun up the top there to make it look kind of cute and how I imagine a real Book of Shadows might look. And I went ahead and did the same for all the other spells that I was doing as well. Right, so now the spells are all written and I've changed the background to white. I now needed to go and arrange them on the page in the right format so that they would print properly. This I found really challenging. It took me quite a few goes before I got this right, because basically for it to work out, I had to print them double-sided, but have it so that on the back of the page, the spell would be exactly behind the one on the front of the page, if that makes sense. So I don't know if there's some easier way of doing this. No doubt there is, but I just used a lot of trial and error. Okay, so now I've moved on to doing the front of the book. So I used the same template for the pages just to get the sizing, but made the front slightly bigger. And I'm putting in the words Book of Shadows, and then wanted to find some images that would work. And I tried quite a few different things. You'll see me searching for things like moon, mystical, just to see what I could find. But eventually I found a nice border that went around the words quite nicely. So now I've printed everything out. I printed out the spells and the cover onto paper. I was going along here and measuring where to cut the pages. Again, I don't know if it's just me, but I was having a lot of trouble imagining exactly how the pages would look, so I ended up measuring and doing very precise cutting. But it did work out eventually, and I managed to get the pages sliced up and all quite even. Some parts of crafting can just take a while and can be quite tedious. I'm not sure what everyone's into. I love audiobooks, sometimes podcasts, but audiobooks are my favourite. And I'm listening to one at the moment called Bunny by Monica Award. Has anyone read or listened to this book? It is something else. I've never read anything like it. It's a horror, which is very different to my usual reading preferences. But it was recommended by a booktuber who I really like. So I gave it a go, and I have to say it is absolutely captivating. I can't stop listening to it, but wow, it's unusual, and it just keeps getting more and more unusual, but extremely good. So that's what I'm listening to here, and for most of my crafting that you see me, I'll normally be listening to an audiobook. So that's the pages all sliced up and folded together, and yay, they match up and make a little booklet. And now I'm just cutting up the front cover of the Book of Shadows. I only needed the very front part of it in the end. I slightly changed the way that I was going to do it. So once I had that one all sliced up, I decided I was going to attach it to this very, very thin wood that I had for some other projects and use that to form the front cover. So here I am with my trusty knife, trying to work out how to cut safely without hurting myself. So I just held the ruler and pressed down over the top of the cover to measure it out. It seemed to be more straightforward than drawing lines or trying to measure it for space. So there we go. I'm just slicing around the cutout picture of the cover. And I got out my sanding file, is that what it's called? My little sanding tool, and just smoothed off the edges there. The next step was painting the cover to make it look a bit more old and more like a mystical old type of book. So I got out my paint. I've got some gold paint there and some black, and I was mixing it together to try and make a colour that I liked. I did make it quite watery because I wasn't really wanting a thick colour, more of kind of a wash. So I painted over the small piece of wood and then painted over the cover as well, just like I say, a very light wash, and that turned out pretty well. And now that they're painted, I'm using it's called a gloss varnish, any kind of varnish that you would use for like decoupage, Mod Podge, is that what it's called, the other kind? This is the one that I use. And I'm just using that to, first of all, stick the paper cover to the wood and then to go over the top of it to make that kind of decoupage effect, as if it's sort of ingrained in the wood. Now, this step was a last minute decision, but I was pretty happy with it. I just painted on some, again, that same wash of paint onto some cardboard and did it on both sides so that I could then cut out the whole cover of the book. And surprisingly, once it was all cut out, it did look quite effective. So now I have the front cover attached to the wood with that decoupage effect, and this is how the cardboard looked once I cut it out into the right size and shape for the book cover. I just folded it over to make a spine, so not quite folded in half, but just folded in on both sides so it creates that book cover kind of effect. And so the last step in the cover is just sticking on the front image to the actual book cover there. So I'm just using regular craft glue for that one. So now it's time to bind those pages together. So here we are with some very, very novice bookmaking, really just having a go and seeing how it turns out. But actually, it turned out pretty well. So I just threaded a needle with one piece of white thread, and then in the folds of the book, I pointed the needle through before I made the stitches. So I just made a line of little tiny holes. I started off with 3, but then ended up doing 5, which I think worked better. And then I just sewed it basically as you would sew some regular stitches. And I think I went over each stitch twice just to make sure it was held together, and then tied a knot to finish it off. I've sped this part up here just to give you an idea of how it looked, but do be careful with the needle. I thought I was being pretty careful, but that part there was me stabbing myself in the finger. It was quite uncomfortable. So yes, please be careful. It is a bit tricky pushing the needle through without getting yourself in the finger. Now that the pages have been bound together with the thread, it's just time to glue them into the cover. So I literally just squeezed some glue down the side and then pressed the spine of the book pages into the spine of the cover and held it there for a few seconds until it was strong enough to hold itself up, and then just let it dry properly. And that's basically it. And so here is how it turned out. I'm pretty happy with it. It's very cute, kind of similar to what I was imagining. Like I said at the beginning, I could definitely have done more pages quite easily. So if I did it again, I think I'd make it quite a thick book. But on the whole, I really enjoyed making this project. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope I'll see you for the next one.